Welcome back to Wise Wealth Podcast, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I've got an absolutely exciting guest on the show. I've got Philip Grindell. We've got some awesome things to talk about, and maybe not slightly just investments of what we're looking at, but this time how we can protect that, and also what's going on in this very highly volatile year that we've got ahead of ourselves. Elections left, right, and centre, and what are the potential threats to high net wealth individuals and also the whole political sphere in itself. So thanks for joining me, Philip, and welcome to the show.
Samuel, thank you for having me on. Lovely to be here.
Awesome. So I think if you can let everybody know just a little bit about your background, what your expertise is, and sort of like what's your past.
Sure. So I spent, for my sins, 30 plus years in the Met Police, predominantly as a detective, predominantly on the kind of special operations, specialist crime areas. Kind of couple of highlights, which I suppose 3 or 4 highlights really. I mean, I spent a lot of time on a murder squad. So obviously last week, very sadly, we saw the death of Richard Taylor, Damalola Taylor's father. I was on that initial investigation, both the investigations that happened. Richard was one of the most inspiring men you're ever going to meet. Rolling forward to sort of 2005, we had the London bombing campaigns. I was currently at that time working on the counter-terrorism teams. And for the first time, we had a joint MI5, MI6 team created. And I was the detective posted onto that team. And so I spent 3 years working there with them on the intelligence side of counterterrorism and the covert and proactive sides. And then kind of got promoted a few times, did various other bits and pieces. And then the other highlight was, of course, 2016, when Jo Cox, the MP, was assassinated in her constituency.
Yeah.
And what happened then was the head of counterterrorism, Neil Basu, who I'd worked for 20 odd years back in Brixton in the days and all that, asked me to go into Parliament and set up a protective intelligence and workplace violence team to look at all the threats and the abuse and the intimidation that politicians were getting. This was bang in the middle of the Brexit period. And build the intelligence picture around where the threats were coming from, what do they look like, and a nice simple one at the end, just oh, by the way, stop the next attack, which we actually successfully did. But what actually happened was I, like probably many people, left school at 16 with pretty much nothing, joined the army and then joined the police. And so I was coming towards the end of my policing career, had a great career, but you don't get any qualifications really that's much use to you. So I went and did a master's degree in security management as a mature student. And my dissertation, I flipped to look at the science behind how our high profile targets attacked. And much of the research is US based. And there is a kind of predominant piece where in the 90s, the US Secret Service wrote a piece of research, which identified these behaviors that people who attack high profile targets tend to have. Not all of them, but they will have at least 1 or 2 of these particular indicators. I had the good fortune to meet the person that wrote the research, who became a mentor for me. And I kind of reintroduced that methodology back into Parliament. And what happened is, over the period of time that we'd been there, we'd increased reporting by about 400%.
Wow.
So if you look at it from a workplace violence type scenario, so a toxic workplace, one of the big challenges right now is that about 80% of incidents that are unacceptable, violent, etc., go unreported. And there's particular reasons why. We've actually written the research on that. We've got a white paper on our website about that.
Yeah.
But by doing that, by changing those protocols back when I was in Parliament, we increased reporting by 400%, which meant we were getting a huge amount of intelligence coming and a huge amount of information and a huge amount of threats. And of course, the challenge is differentiating between those people who make a threat and those people who actually pose a threat.
Yeah.
And in 2017, an MP walked into the office late in the evening and said to me, "Phil, I've got a bit of information for you," and gave me a piece of paper with 7 lines on it. And from that 7 lines, I was able to say, that's probably the next threat. And it was. In fact, it was a planned attack on a member of Parliament and a police officer. And the individuals were sentenced to life imprisonment in due course.
Wow.
Because of that, it became, a real hunger around, okay, so if you can interpret these things, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. But I was only contracted to work for parliamentarians, for people in politics. But I was coming towards the end of my career, and I was getting approaches from various people to say, "Oh, can you help me? Can you help me?" And so in 2019, I retired, and brilliantly, I mean, a brilliant strategic move just before lockdown. We started Diffuse, and
Okay.
really, what it was is, we work with private and corporate clients and give them kind of high quality investigative intelligence and threat management. And what we do, a lot of it is bringing some of the services out from the kind of government environments into the public domain. And so that's intelligence. It's things like forensic psychology and behavioral profiling, not telling someone they're going to be 6 foot, they're going to go have blue eyes and they're going to look like this. That's not behavioral
Yeah.
profiling. It's describing the type of personality, describing how they're going to behave, describing what sort of threat they pose, understanding how to engage and communicate with them based on their psychology. So that if you had got someone who's in a dispute with you or is posing a threat to you, you're not responding in a generalistic fashion. It's a very bespoke, tailored response to that specific person, mindful of any particular issues they may have. So we brought all of these practices out into the real world, started that in 2019, and we've been blessed. We've worked with some of the biggest clients in the world, 2 or 3 A-list musicians who've got one name and everyone in the world knows who they are. We've got some very wealthy clients we work with who want us to monitor everything that happens about them on the internet, all of their
Yeah.
threats, all of their breach data, manage all that. They don't want to be bothered by it. They don't want to know about all the noise. They want to know, do I have anything to worry about? So
Yeah.
so they rely upon us to do that. And then of
Just
course we bring in all the stalking and other expertise around that.
just out of interest, did you ever cross paths in your career with Michelle Roycroft?
I know Michelle. Yeah, yeah, I know Michelle. Not from actually. We didn't know each other in the police, but we've met subsequently, and I know Michelle. Yeah, she's a lovely lady.
Yeah, I just thought it's a small world. I know Michelle as well, and I just thought, I think she was in the West Ham murder squad, I think, in the Met. Um, Very interesting. Yeah, small world, isn't it? Very, very, very exciting. And I think what you do is very much very interesting. I'll just that's just out of interest. I'm sure quite a few other people are probably thinking, can I ask what are potentially those 2 or 3 traits that you identified within that 7 lines of data, or what was in sort of that sort of research that said these are the specific key areas that you want to look out for? Just I think it'd be quite
Sure.
interesting.
So that there are so the research started was about 1990s. It was released, and then it's been progressed since then. So it's evolved since then. But in effect, there are 8 of these key indicators. I won't go through all of them because we'll be here all day. But some
Yeah,
of the key things, as an example, are in terms of private figures and public figures, politicians, high net worth, etc. One of the most interesting facts that come out of it is that people who make threats rarely pose a threat. So what does that mean? So that means all the people that you hear saying, I've had a death threat, someone's threatened to kill me, threatened to do this, you can almost invariably ignore all of those threats. So there's this brilliant concept written by a great guy and again, another great mentor of mine, a guy called Ted Calhoun. And he calls it the hunter and howler concept. And
okay.
this is how it really works. So if you imagine you've got 2 groups of people, the howlers are the trolls. They're the ones that are abusing you on social media. They're the ones that are sending you threats. Those are ones that communicate death threats, etc. Their intention, their desire is to cause you fear, to intimidate you, to gain some sort of psychological edge over you, to have some sort of power. Very often, and certainly we saw it in Parliament when we looked at and subsequently we work with high powered and high profile women, the motivation is by a let's call it a inadequate male who wants to
Mm,
gain some sort of power over you. And so the way that they do that is by creating fear in your life and intimidation and kind of unwanted and unexpected activities. But what actually happens is, and we see it all the time, is that people interpret that as a real threat. And so we see politicians, and I've seen them all week long going on the news and TV saying, I'm inundated with threats, I'm in real danger. Actually, no, you're not, because threats don't equal danger.
yeah,
Threats equal danger in so much as it creates a psychological impact on you. And that has a real impact, because if you are consistently targeted in that way and you're consistently receiving negative and threatening communications, then you will become paranoid, and then you become hyper vigilant, which means you start seeing threats where they don't exist. And what
yeah,
also happens is your decision making becomes flawed. And so, if you're an investor and you're making these decisions around investments, but actually you are being targeted, and therefore you are paranoid, and therefore you're probably not sleeping well, and therefore your brain's not working as it might do, you might make some real significant issues or mistakes because of your decision making is flawed. And so
Yeah.
we saw this in Parliament very much. I've seen it with a lot of private clients we work with. And, I can, give you stories about hugely impressive, hugely powerful, hugely intelligent people who break down. And we've
Yeah.
all got a tipping point. So anyone who says, oh, it won't happen to me, what tends to happen is men say to me, I'm okay, but my wife's really upset about this. And women will say, I'm really worried about this. And women are targeted differently to men. The way that they are, what the communication, the language use is different. Women, I
Yeah.
think, are much more honest to say, I'm really upset about this. I'm scared about this. I need some help. Men tend to make out they're not that bothered and offload it to my family's really worried, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
But actually, they are just as worried as anyone else. So,
Yeah.
one of the common denominators that come out of this thing is that people who make threats don't pose threats. And so we can't. And what happens is most security companies, as an example, respond to a threat.
Yeah.
So a client will have a threat delivered to them. It'll be a communicated threat on social media or however other means it is, and they will ramp up their security. And that's a
Mm.
complete waste of time and money
Mm.
because you get a threat does not mean there's an increase in the actual threat. So that's one of the common denominators. And if we look at all the attacks on US presidents, if we look at all the attacks on British MPs, and I mean physical attacks where
Yeah.
they've been hurt or killed, not in no circumstances, not once did the person who attacked ever directly threaten the person they attacked. So there's a key thing there. And yet we
Yeah.
still get drawn down this line of, I've been abused, I've had death threats, I'm in danger. No, you're not. You're in psychological harm. We need to deal with that. We also need to look at who's doing it because we need to make sure they're not escalating towards a danger. And there's this second concept that came out of it, which is called a pathway to violence. So we
Okay.
know, as an example, that most of the people that attack, and if we use the term attack, let's think about reputational attacks as much as anything, psychological attacks, financial attacks. They're targeting you, they're locking onto you, and they're coming after you. Generally speaking, it starts from a form of grievance. There's an issue they have.
Yeah.
And those grievances are often caused by sort of 3 or 4 areas. So it'd be like loss. They're upset about they've lost something. They're angry about something. You've
Yeah.
humiliated them. And so they're motivated by this greed, by this grievance. And then what happens is because they can't resolve that grievance in a way that satisfies them,
Yeah.
they then think, okay, well, I've got no other option now. I have to
But
do
let's.
something else.
Yeah.
But they start to escalate. And so what the most serious cases we see where they'll start mentioning suicide or murder, not necessarily about you, but they'll make references. And one of the other indicators is called last resort language. And it's this language of no hope. So it'll be things like, you give me no other choice. You wait
Yeah.
and see what happens next. You've backed me into a corner. All these sort of comments around that. Or they're going to say, I've got nothing worth living for. I'm just going to kill myself. Those sort of suicidal thoughts
Yeah.
mean, in their view, they've got nothing to lose. So these are types of things that they'll do. Leakage is another great one. The leakage is where a threat is made, but it's not directly communicated to the person who they're going to attack. So, as an
Mm.
example, in the US school shootings
Yeah.
and in other mass attacks, we see this where a person will post on social media, don't go to school tomorrow, or wait till tomorrow, I'll be in the news. All these
Yeah.
sort of subtle things. And we saw this, you and I were talking beforehand about the attack on Westminster Bridge.
Yeah.
So I was a detective that ran the security in Parliament for the first few hours on that attack when my colleague was killed. And again, if we look at that particular attacker who was a lone actor, he leaked a lot of these behaviors. And one of his leakages was when he went to see his mum, who he hadn't seen for a while. And as he was leaving, he said to her, oh, by the way, they're going to say I'm a terrorist and I'm not. Now, I'm pretty confident if I left my house and said that, or if you left your house and you said that, your family would be thinking, bloody hell is he on about? Right?
Yeah.
It's leaking that he's going to be doing something. Now,
Yeah.
it's not always obvious. And if you don't understand or know what to look for, you will never find it because you'll just ignore these flippant comments. And so certainly one of the things we do when we're working with some of our high net worth clients is we work with their admin teams, their PA, their chief of staff, etc., to teach them these type of things, so that when communications are coming in, be those emails, letters, phone calls, whatever, they know what to listen for, and they know what to pick out. Because if they don't know those things, they're going to dismiss these things as, oh, just a ramblings of a mad person. So you
Yeah.
can have the best security in the world, but your security won't know there's an escalating issue. And the thing
Yeah.
about fixated people is they like proximity. That's why they turn up. And they'll turn up at your security and they'll chat to your external security because they want them to leak information to them. They're
Yeah.
actually kind of hostile reconnaissance, but that's how they behave. If they know you're at a function, they'll turn up at a function. And so it's about restricting the access to information. They don't need to know where you live. They don't need to know necessarily every venue you're going to be at, or where you're on holiday, all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff, because that's the sort of material they're looking for.
So whilst we talk about that and the current sort of political environment that we're in, do you think there could be an assassination attempt on the likes of Trump?
I think the US are obviously very heavily securitized.
Yeah.
He will have US Secret Service protection teams all around him. Um, the methodology I use is the same as the US Secret Service, so they'll have all that, be looking at that, and I know coming to some of the stuff they do, they will certainly be looking for it, absolutely, and the same for Biden and for other politicians. I think, if you look at the US and if you look at the UK and you look at the US, we know that the attacks on politicians, as an example, have come from two environments, both extreme. One is the Islamist terrorist threat, and one is the extreme right wing terror threat. If you look at the US, arguably the extreme right wing, the white supremacists, as they call it over there, all that type of thing are Trump supporters.
Yeah.
So they're probably less likely to try and obviously attack him.
Yeah.
Um, I think if he doesn't get in, I think there'll be probably some issues, because we saw that last time when they call it fake votes, and the election didn't happen,
Yeah.
etc. Interesting, I read an article today in the paper that said for the first time the polls look like they're switching towards Biden, as an example.
Yeah. I
But
saw.
I mean, it's kind of a best of a bad bunch, isn't it? Really. But I think those two figureheads will have huge protective security around them, armed protective security by the U.S. Secret Service. But then we've seen, if we look back at Reagan when he was attacked,
Yeah.
you can have the best security in the world, but if a fixated person wants to get that close and shoot, they will do. And so it's very difficult to deter that.
Yes. I suppose I think when we're looking at the candidates that are currently running at this moment in time, we've actually got RFK, we've got Junior, haven't we?
Yeah.
Um, and he's adamant that they're weaponizing the fact that they're refusing to actually give him presidential security. Do you believe that as well? That's an interesting concept, to actually not supply him with the presidential, security that they usually give these candidates when they're running, to avoid these threats. Do you believe that?
Well, I think the problem is in the US. I mean, I think Trump and Biden are the candidates. So I'm not sure that JFK Jr. is actually a candidate, because who is he representing? Which party is he representing now? And I
Is
don't
it
know. I don't know
interesting?
what the rules are around. The US Secret Service clearly won't protect everybody, so they will have finite resources, and it may well be that their protocols are that they only protect the kind of two candidates from the Republican or Democratic Party. Without knowing the specifics of what their protocols are around that, it'd be difficult to say.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think there's quite a large amount of investors out there that think that he might actually upset the elections, because you've got the very much right wing and left wing. We know where they're going, but then you've got sort of the middle ground, which he could sort of capitalize those very conservative Republicans and conservative Democrats to lean towards him, especially with his family history. It'd be very interesting to see how that prevails. Talking about politics and politicians, do you foresee any threats within the UK elections? It's not something that you really hear about or see, but I'm assuming behind the scenes there's a lot that goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been quite a lot of chatter about it recently, and a lot of talk by MPs and politicians around how unsafe they feel Some of that, I will have to say, goes back to this misunderstanding of how threats are communicated and the reality of that. Do I think they're in danger? Well, here's how it works in the UK. So if we look at all the attacks on politicians over the last 25 years, and we'll come to David Amess specifically at the end, but if we look at all of them, there is a pattern. And the pattern is that none of the MPs who've been targeted were high profile or controversial or anything that would make them high risk. So when I read in the papers that, oh, we've identified these people as high risk, that's complete nonsense. Because if you actually study how attacks against British MPs occur, it is never about the MP. It's always about the attacker. Because in every case, the attacker has been a local constituent. So they target their MP because they get access to their local MP. So in 3 cases, as an example, they have made an appointment to see their MP and attack them in their constituency office because they can circumvent the security. Now, David Amess is an anomaly slightly because he was attacked by someone who wasn't a local constituent. But here's the rule. If you're a member of parliament, you're only supposed to engage your local constituents. So if somebody else contacts you from a different constituency, you should be sending them to that local constituency. So he should never agreed to meet the person that killed him. David Amess also chose not to take heed of any of the security advice or have any of the security measures installed. So the message really is that every single MP, with the exception probably of a couple of government ministers and cabinet ministers and shadows, is at the same level of risk, because it's not about them. It's about the attacker, where they are. Do I think they're at risk? Yes, I do. It'll almost certainly come from an Islamist extremist or a far right extremist. We've got the whole scenario, haven't we, where the Israeli-Palestine campaign is swinging from one way to the other, and we've seen a rise in focus on some of the Islamist issues, and from that we'll see some extreme elements falling out of the back of that. And all we need, if we look at the attacks, is they all tend to be lone actors. So they're not organized terrorist groups saying go and do this in the way that Al-Qaeda used to, or the IRA used to.
Yeah, well, except for that Russian one in Moscow recently.
But they're ISIS.
Yeah,
that's a different organization. So the way that ISIS operate was, back in the day, they actually put a statement out saying you don't need to wait for permission to do something. You can self-motivate. Very different to when Al-Qaeda, so 7/7 and all that sort of stuff, where you had to, well, everything was centrally managed, basically the case in Afghanistan. And that's why we've seen a spate of lone actor attacks subsequently. Now, ISIS will always claim credit for that because they want to be recognized and they want that credit. But a lone actor can go and do something, as in Parliament, as in Westminster Bridge, and then leave a message saying, I'm doing this for ISIS. ISIS have never heard of that person, but they're going to claim it because it's in their interest. So I think what we'll probably see, if we see anything, is going to be a self-inspired, a lone actor type inspired. The extreme right wing tend to be, but not always, slightly more organized. So National Action, which was the attack plan on Rosie Cooper we disrupted, was an organized terrorist plot, although instigated by an individual. But I think with the way that our politics is, with the way in which we're getting very kind of like America, very sort of, you're either this side or that side, and if you're either right or you're wrong. With the rise of the extreme Islamist elements, I think we're in a fertile place for an attack. What's got to happen is all the MPs have got to listen to the police and the advice and put the security measures in, follow the advice they're given.
And with the MPs, are they under protection, or is it something that they've got to go and get themselves?
No, so every MP, the minute they're elected, is facilitated a full protective security package, which is all the security measures they need, if you like, in terms to reinforce their security. At their home or their offices, etc. So they get that all free of charge. That's all done for them. They have to apply for it, but it's there free of charge if they want it, or free of charge to them anyway. And then if the threat goes up, it comes to my old team, and it was my responsibility then to say, yes, you can have additional measures, and these are what you're going to get, or no, you're not going to get particular additional measures because actually the threat isn't increased. So yes, you've had a load of threats and abuse, but actually we've assessed that and they're not real, so we don't need extra security. we recognize that you're psychologically in fear, so we'll deal with that bit of it, but you're not actually in physical danger. So they do get all that. At their surgeries, if they have their surgeries, they're entitled to a security guard. But a lot of MPs no longer hold surgeries, which is a mistake in my view, because that's a key part of our democracy, that you have the right to go and speak to your MP.
Yeah.
But they don't get armed protection, and I don't think they need armed protection either, because you'd have to arm everybody, every MP. You couldn't pick and choose which you're going to do, because for the reasons
Yeah.
I've said. So my personal view is the facilities for all they need are out there. They need to just apply for it and make sure they get it, which will be facilitated through Parliament, and B, they need to install it. They need to, and then follow the advice they're given.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. So basically, you're saying it might not be off the cards, that there could be, heightened. In the UK, you're pretty much saying that potentially more of like a Islamist potential threat or attack here, but in the US, you're saying that actually it's not really now or during the election where you might see the likes of Trump be potentially, an attempt of assassination. You're saying actually the risk is really if Trump doesn't get him, what happens after? And I've heard quite a few people actually talk about civil war outbreak after that. But I think, yeah, I think that's probably the main focus, is what happens if he doesn't.
Yep.
But there's also that whole risk of if he gets arrested beforehand, before the actual, before he even knows where he stands. That's the main issue there, isn't it? It's almost like what happens with, I don't want to compare it, but the Mexican drug lords, once they're in jail, they have huge, pretty much armies and funding. There's like, yeah, we'll get you out, and you just see it all the time, don't you? They're just literally breaking out of jail, and then they're back, and there's like all these wars getting declared. God knows where it's going, but it's very interesting, isn't it? How everything is leaning very far left or very far right, and it's strange, isn't it? Why there isn't many people in that middle ground anymore? It's
Well, I think there is. I think there is. Here's the issue, though: is that it's like everything, isn't it? It's the squeaky bike gets the oil. So what happens is those of us in the middle ground, we get ignored and forgotten about, because we don't make a fuss. We don't go out and
yeah,
marches and demonstrate and protest, because we're in the middle ground, aren't we? But it's
yeah,
the extreme side on the left or the right who go out and make the noise and protest and create and demonstrate and all that. So they get the notice. They get the focus of attention. The
yeah,
vast majority, which is why both, if you look at the UK as an example, both political parties have kind of slowly leached towards the middle over years, because that's where the majority of votes are. The
yeah,
vast majority of us just get forgotten about. And so
yeah.
actually, it isn't that we don't pose a threat, although, arguably the middle don't pose a threat. It's just that we always take notice of the extremes because they get the most attention.
Yeah, and the media focuses on that, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's negative news sells more than the quiet news, I suppose.
Well, there's no news, is there? There's no news about you and me just kind of getting on with our lives and trying to do our best. That's not news. If we're
Yeah,
all out protesting, different story.
yeah, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Be super interesting to see from that side of things where it develops throughout the year. I suppose talking more about that whilst we've got you here, we may as well utilize your background and we start looking at social medias. It's not necessarily new anymore, but the threats are increasing on social media. I'm actually a victim of this myself. Large amounts of people can sign up to social media without doing any KYC, without uploading proof of who they are, and there's a lot of impersonators out there. You can you can go on Instagram and type in Samuel Leach. You'll probably find 50 profiles of me, of people pretending to be me, to fleece people out of money, saying that they're opening up investment rounds and things like this. What's sort of your take on that and how that's developing?
So I think we've got a huge issue, and I think, going back to the election campaigns, we're going to see quite a bit of this. But we've got a huge issue around how do we prove that a message or a person is genuine. And by that, I mean, the whole concept of deep fake videos. And what's interesting actually is with deep fake videos is it's the deep fake audios, which actually are far easier and far better quality to produce.
Yeah, I've seen that side really develop actually. I think it was even in the papers the other day about a girl who was fully deep faked naked and was sort of like held to ransom for a video of her being naked. She was like, I had no clue how this has even happened, how it got out, or where I am in that. But she could clearly identify that as 100% her and her body. And it was
Yeah.
turned out it was one of her best friends that actually created the deep fake. And that's a very interesting topic because when we spoke about AI and how that can change the narratives of things, that is very interesting because it used to be a bit of a joke. You know, there was an article that went viral of the Pope wearing a Canada Goose jacket, a white one, and it looked so real, and everybody was like, "Can you believe he's doing this?" and so on and so forth. There was another one of Trump in cuffs when he got raided at his Florida residency, and none of it was true. And it's very interesting, isn't it? How this could be. Well, it is the next security threat, really, of false representation, I suppose, or skewing a story in the media about an individual by utilizing this sort of technology. And how on earth, how are you preparing in your industry to protect individuals against deep fakes?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we spend quite a bit of time on with our clients, particularly our retained clients, is on the whole concept of breach data, managing breach data. So people have no concept of how much personal data, PII as it's called, personal identifiable information, is floating around the internet, the deep web, the dark web. In the US, as an example, they have data brokers. So selling all of your data. So whenever you send out an email and you've got your signature on the bottom, they're sucking all that away and reselling that as data for you. And so what we do with some of our clients is we manage their breach data, which means basically every 24 hours, we're sweeping the entire deep, dark and internet looking for their data. And we're looking for all of their address data, for their dates of birth, for their email addresses, passwords, all that sort of stuff. And we're deleting it every 24 hours. And so that we're reducing the availability of that material to be bought by people who want to fake things. So that's one side of the argument. The other
Uh,
side is the fake
on
video.
that question, that's a big. How are you even deleting that data from the online dark web? How are you doing that?
Well, because we have facilities to do that. That's quite simple to do. I mean, sometimes you can just buy it because it's that cheap sometimes. But actually,
Okay.
we have a team that are actually the team we're using at the moment are ex-US NSA, so that they've got particular expertise on those formats. So they're sweeping every 24 hours, and then we produce a monthly report for our clients to say, this is the data that we've removed. We don't tell them every piece of it, but we say we've had 40 pieces of data. It's either a traffic light system of red, white, blue, green, amber, and red in terms of the severity of it. We're removing profiles, fake profiles of you. We're removing, and so it's about constantly cleansing everything that's not true about you or everything that is your personal information. Because there's two sides to it. Criminals will do exactly the same because they want to know if you're a wealthy individual, they want to know, where do you live? What can I find out about you? Can I target you? Do I know that you've got certain things I want? And they find that information on the internet, the deep web, dark web, because all of us are leaking information. And even if you're not doing it, somebody else is doing it. So
Mm.
I've got clients who said to me recently, can you do a kind of review? We do what's called a vulnerability assessment, where we will search all of these databases, forums, everything else, to say, let's see what we can find out about you. Let's
Yeah.
find everything we can trace about you. And we've got two examples I'll give you, which kind of illustrate the point. One was a client who's a very wealthy man and said to me, you won't find anything on me. I'm not on social media. Never had a social media profile in my life. So I created a Facebook profile of him. And I did it because I was able to get all of his data and open an account using his personal data. So good was the data, so good was the profile. His two daughters became friends on that profile. When I gave him it, he said, that's not me. I'm not on Facebook. I said, no, you are. There's your profile. He said, well, that's ridiculous. And his wife was saying, actually, those actually are all our photographs. And we just basically gone out and trawled and collected it and created the profile. It was so accurate. But what happens then is I control the narrative because it's
Yeah.
my profile. So I can then start publishing stuff that is that is defamatory or is
Yeah.
untrue or whatever, and people think it's him. So your reputation's being damaged. So that's one example of how having that data out there is so dangerous. The other example was another client who said, "Can you do the same?" And I said to him, "Yep, you've got a picture in your home which is worth £6 million. It's in this particular room. I happen to know that you're leaving the country in a few days on this particular private jet." And he's like, "But how the hell do you know that?" And I said, "Because your daughter takes selfies. And in the
Yeah.
selfies, this picture's in the background. And I've had an antiques dealer friend of mine said, if that's genuine, that's worth X. Well, knowing what you're worth, I know it's genuine. And we can sell that pretty quickly." But
Yeah.
interestingly, when you had the extension done to your house, the local authority have left all the plans up on the internet.
Yeah.
So we can track them. We've got all the CCTV positions, everything. So we can track exactly what room that's in your house. And in terms of your travel details, again, your wife and daughter took a picture a while ago near your private jet with a tail number in, and we can track the movements and the bookings of that jet. So we can track your life. So we know on that day you're out the country, we can be in your house and out pretty quickly with your work of art. That's
Yeah.
all because that data exists out there.
Yeah, very scary when you look at that. And I don't even think you need that data out there. For example, I've probably got 1,000 posts on social media. I think if you wanted to replicate me or my voice or anything like that, there's things out there now. You could download my podcast and have my audio, retune my AI voice. I think it wasn't even that long ago that someone managed to get telephone access to their bank account just by using the AI voice on the phone and having that person talk through it because it sounded like them and there was a personal relationship at that bank where they could do that.
Fake voice, as I mentioned earlier, is much better, much more advanced than fake video. Although
Yeah.
fake video is pretty good. So as an example, we've seen cases where you've got CEO fraud, where someone like yourself will phone up the office and say, "Look, I'm out and about. I need something urgently. I need you to transfer X amount of money to this account, blah, blah, blah." And it's your voice. Or you get
Yeah.
the ones where, somebody phones their mum and says, "Mum, look, I'm traveling in South America. I've been robbed. I've lost all my money. Can you just put £1,000 in my account to cover me for the next couple of weeks?" And it's his voice. So it's really difficult to do these things. There's an interesting case of a very high net worth lady who's traveling in on the Trans-Siberian Express, and she's an art dealer. And she came across this place, and she had a protocol in place where she could uh, communicate with her guy back in the US. So if she's making any high expense funds, he'd clear it. The problem was, it wasn't her that was making the request; it was somebody else. So what you have to do is simple things like factor in code words, so that if I phone the office and ask for a transfer, this is the code word I'm going to use. If I
Mm.
don't use that code word, take no notice of, because it isn't me.
Yeah.
And simple little things like that mean that if they don't have the correct code word, and it doesn't have to be something, it can be, your favorite football team or your,
Yeah.
your first pet or something. If they don't use the code word, it isn't me.
I think the issue around that is not that anybody can't do that. It's a very simple protection method. They just never think that they are the target.
No. Well, everyone should think they're the target. That's the whole point. When I get those phone calls and it's my bank and they say, "Hello, Mr. Grindell, this is your bank speaking, blah blah. Can I take you through security?" I say, "No, you can't take me through security. I've got no idea who you are." And they
Yeah.
say, "Oh, okay." I said, "So I'll call you back and I'll go through security that way. So give me a reference number and I'll call you back." Because we shouldn't be giving out our security details. Banks shouldn't be asking us for our security details.
Yeah.
I do some work with Sky News. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago, and they said to me, "Oh, for the purpose of the piece we're doing to camera, can we have where you live?" And I said, "No, you can't. You don't need to know where I live." "Oh, but the listeners like to know." Although I said, "Well, I'm not going to give you the village I live in. I'll give you the county I'm living in, but you shouldn't be putting that out there either." So there's simple things that people who
Yeah.
So as an example, people can opt out of the electoral register. Now there's two registers. There's one where we tick a box and we think we're opting out, and there's
Yeah.
another one called the anonymous register, which means you don't appear on the register at all, because the register can be bought, and it is bought by political parties and marketing companies. That's why political parties always address you when they write your home address, because they buy this data. So you can opt out of that data completely. So you appear anonymously on the electoral roll, which means when you go to vote, you do it on a reference number. They don't know who you are. They don't know where you live. They just know you're entitled to vote. So again, we're giving
Can you
away
tell people
data.
how on earth you do that? Because I'm pretty certain there is a lot of people on here that would want to know that. Because I'll be honest, I don't live in the UK anymore. But that's one thing that I absolutely hated was the electoral side, because it just meant that so many people could have your data,
Yeah,
and you could purchase that. And to the point where, I refused to even register. I was like,
yeah,
I'm not registering for anything. I even had at one point someone turn up to my house and say, "You need to register. You're not on the electoral vote." And I was like, "No." And they're
yeah,
like, "You can get fined for this." And I'm like, "Okay,
yeah,
fine
yeah,
me."
yeah.
Um,
I've had exactly the same. And I've said, actually,
yeah.
I'm on the roll. I'm just anonymous. You can't find me. And the way you do it, there's a particular form, you document, you download and you fill in, and you have to be represented by a local police inspector or
Okay.
a person from the local authority. And effectively, it has to be around threat and risk or reasons why. But you can, certainly I do it because of my background and where I've worked. You could do it because your wealth, and so you've been targeted, you've had threats, etc. So we used to do it for all the MPs
Yeah.
because nobody, no reason. I mean, I personally think that, unlike you, the whole electoral register thing is great if it's sat on a secure database and no one can access it, but that's not what happens. We shouldn't be giving away all our data like this free of charge. Every
Yeah.
time you use your Nectar card, you're giving away data. People don't realize how much we're giving away.
Well, there's that big thing at the moment. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Temu, the Chinese app, and it was all over social media. As in, all you got to do is download the app and then share it, and Temu will reward you with £50. And everybody was doing it. It was a It was like a frenzy. Continuously, I'm seeing people like me. I've made literally 10 people downloaded it. I've made £500, and I said, if you think right that you're getting that money for nothing for downloading an app, you're completely wrong. And now it's been brought out about how it's got basically malware on, and it's actually downloading everything, your entire data from your phone, your contacts, your messages, everything. And now I think there's actually a lawsuit against Temu in the UK. And I think actually that should probably be a higher security risk. It's maybe not MI5 or MI6 or whoever the right department is, but let's be honest, it's a Chinese company getting UK citizens' data
Yep.
in a unorthodox manner,
Yep.
and rewarding them for that, for sharing it. And it was absolutely huge. And I think from a security risk, this is what we're going to see
Yeah.
more of. How basically you sold your entire life and your entire data for £50. That brand, whether they're going to use it for, dodgy activity, but to be honest with you, they can build an entire profile around what you're interested in, what your likes are, dislikes, what you're buying, what your behavior is, and ultimately target you in a much more, it's basically like Cambridge Analytica of what happens there with all of their data collection. I think that this is something that we're definitely going to see more of, and I think it needs to be clamped down on quite aggressively, especially, we're not on best terms with China, we're not on best terms with Russia, but yet we still let those apps hit our market and hit the UK residency and
Well,
those in UK.
The US are looking to ban TikTok, aren't they? Which is kind of ironic, isn't it? When you think, why does Elon Musk spend £4 billion or whatever it was, or $1 billion on Twitter? It wasn't because he wanted to buy Twitter, because he wanted all the data. That's
Yeah,
what he's paying the money for, because data is currency. Data is what they want. Facebook is not a social media platform.
yeah,
Facebook is a data acquisition project. So
yeah,
as soon as we start recognizing that when we go onto Instagram, and you and I are both on Instagram, and when we go on LinkedIn and when we go in all these places, we're giving away our data. So you have to balance the risk about that. Now you could become obsessive and say, well, I'm not going to do anything. Well, sadly, business nowadays, you need to be out there. So you're going to have to give something away. But you
yeah,
need to be doing things like, separating, if you have got a Facebook account, separate your business from your personal.
yeah,
If you've got phone numbers, mobile numbers, separate, have a personal number and a work number, and
yeah,
keep them separate. There's some simple practices that we can all do. And as you say, there's no such thing as a free meal. If someone's paying you for your data, why do you think they want it? Because you're
yeah,
going to get marketed at all the time. That's one thing. But also they're going to sell that data. And if
yeah,
you're an extremely wealthy person or you're a prominent person, people are interested in you. They want your data because they're going to
yeah,
target you either from a marketing sales perspective or from a fixated crime perspective. And so
yeah,
you need to know what data is out there about you, because then you can start managing that data and also managing and understanding the level of risk and threat you're at. If you don't
yeah.
have a clue what data is out there about you, you're blind and you are at risk.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. If we were to look at wrapping this up, what would you like to leave the audience with knowing something? I always like the audience to leave having something that they can take away and apply to their own life, or something where, they have a bit further understanding
Sure.
about the overall environment.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, I think, you can go onto our website, which is diffuseglobal.com, and there are some downloads there where you can take some tests and actually understand where the vulnerabilities in your life are. But certainly, my view is if you are a person of wealth or aspiring to become wealthy, because perhaps you'll know this better than me, but if you achieve rapid wealth, often what happens is in that rapid journey, you're not thinking about security. You're very focused on the business and the success you're achieving. And all of a sudden you arrive at this great place where you're wealthy, you're famous, you're successful, etc. And actually you're vulnerable.
Hmm.
And you need to be thinking about, okay, well, who am I actually asking to do the work around me? Is this actually their expertise? If I want to go investing, I'm going to come to you because you're an expert at that. I'm not going to come to someone who's done a 6-week course and tells me they're an expert.
Yeah,
So, there are lots of people out there who say, oh, I'm an open source expert. I'm a security expert. Okay. What is your background? Oh,
yeah,
I've been in the military. Okay, brilliant. Listen, I was in the military. How does that actually train you to do the job I want you to do now? It may make you brilliant at the protective security side of it, but it won't necessarily teach you about the sort of stuff that we deal with around fixated threats, around threat intelligence of high profile people, etc. So
yeah,
you need to be using that due diligence around who you're choosing to do what. If you're going to employ people, you need to understand, well, who is this person? Not just what's their CV. Does their CV match their LinkedIn profile, both of which they've done? And do their references say good thing? Well, has anyone given you someone to speak to as a reference who's bad, who slags them off? Of course they don't. So,
yeah,
who are they? Are their children activists? Are they going to be campaigning against the things you're investing in? Are they are they related? Have they got Chinese business partners? Do they play golf with a sanctioned Russian person? You need to understand these things because in the modern day, these are all risks. And so we need to be thinking differently about the risks that are facing us because they're not all physical. A huge amount of the risks now, if you're a successful person, are going to be reputational. And with reputational comes financial. So
yeah.
take a breath, pause, get some advice, and then decide what your strategy is going to be to minimize or mitigate the risks that you face.
Find that very fascinating. I think that's absolutely amazing. I suppose I just got a quick question before we wrap up. How many, throughout your experience, sort of MPs that have those sort of relations with Russian business owners, with Chinese business owners, and are in a position of politics power, is that something that you saw frequently during your time of going through that sort of scenario of protecting people? Did you see those relations there?
Well, to be honest, we didn't do that piece of work on the politicians because they wouldn't want us to do that type of work on them.
Got you.
We were looking at the adversaries. But when I'm looking at private clients now, there's two aspects of it. One is look at me and see the vulnerability around me so I can mitigate that. And then
Yeah,
look at people. So I've got a client who runs a hedge fund.
yeah,
He gets me to investigate every person who wants to invest in his hedge fund because he doesn't want any reputational damage to his hedge fund. So he needs to know if you're investing however much millions into my hedge fund, I need to know everything about you. So I need to
yeah,
know, are you related to a Chinese business person? Are you related to a sanctioned person? Are you because I
yeah,
don't want the reputation damning my brand or my other investors. So,
yeah,
you need to be thinking wider than sort of a quick fix because these
yeah.
things, if you're going to spend all this time and energy and brilliance making your fortune, making your success, take some time to think about the other issues around you because that's the bit actually that's going to drag you down.
Yeah. Very, very exciting. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I think the guests have got so much to go away, digest, and sort of take advice from. So I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.